some of this induction equipment, I believe it was to blow the exhaust gases down through the tunnel and up, and then to the surface.
Right.
Well, from the edge of that opening, that tunnel, to this piece of equipment that we could crawl, then we could climb down to the base of the antenna or at the powerhouse. There was tube floors there, so we'd cross over on these tube floors, get onto this equipment, and then we'd climb our way down, and we just were in absolute amazement, just like, whoa, this is, of course, what did we have back then? Well, 50-cent flashlights, but we had a Coleman lantern, which helped, but again, very limited, because if you really look at the base on a Titan 1 is the powerhouse is 160 feet.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing is enormous.
What was the LCC?
I'm sorry?
What was the LCC? It had to have been pretty close.
It was 100 feet.
Oh, okay.
Its base, launch ops was 100 feet, where the powerhouse was 160 feet. And before, going back to when I was a kid at my grandparents every summer, I mean, I would be way little. I mean, and go up and spend the summers with them. And my grandfather would always make reference to the powerhouse, to the powerhouse, to the powerhouse. And I thought, and as little, I always, what a crazy name, powerhouse. It just didn't seem right to me. And what was really ironic was all those years later when I was really putting everything together. My grandfather had already passed away. And it was really more of, it was a powerhouse. So, I kept thinking, well, my grandfather's just kind of making that name up. But no, it wasn't. It really was a powerhouse. And so, just like for the operational side of it, they would call launch operations.
Yeah.
And, of course, it had 2 stories, but it was only 100 feet at its base, but still another dome. But nothing as massive as 160. I mean, I can still remember with being down there with that Coleman lantern going, it lights up, but this place is enormous. And so I remember us walking to the junction. And what I call the junction is when you're coming from the powerhouse, on your left would be the access portal entry with its big concrete doors at the bottom.
Right.
Okay. And then, of course, that was the elevator shaft. And then, of course, the walkway, the steel walkway that went all the way around it, clear to the surface to bring the personnel down.
Right.
And then on the right were some of the tanks.
That's right.
That were built in. And so when you would walk by those, you could always smell it. I still to this day can remember smelling the diesel tanks.
Damn.
So there had to be some residual diesel left in those tanks, but you could smell it. And then if you walked a little further, there was the tunnel that went to the antenna silos. Okay. And then kind of on an angle was the cableway or the utility tunnel that led to the launchers. And if you walk straight ahead, you're in the launch operations building.
Yeah.
Of course, going through double doors. And all those doors were still there. I was very impressed. I remember the salvager telling me, Gary, we removed all of the diamond plating over the tunnels leading to the launchers. And sure enough, of course, that was the first thing to go because, they could just pick that up and run. That was very easy for them to get to. And I still remember going into launch operations, and we would look around on the lower level, what I call the lower level, and then we would climb the stairs. Because just very, very nice stairs. And going up to the upper level, which was truly the launch area, where they would have launched the missile. So, see, I would like to know, here's one for your listeners. I would like to know, Fred Epler was just, I miss him to this day, God rest his soul. Because it was just a fun guy. There was nobody who taught me more about Titan 1, really. Not just my grandfather, but it was Fred Epler. from the true Titan 1 because his father worked on the Titan 1s at the Lowry sites. So that was the tie-in, and then Fred worked for the history office at former Lowry Air Force Base before it was torn out. Now, the history office is still there on an old portion of what is left of the original runways, but the bulk of the old Lowry Air Force Base runways have all been torn out. But anyway, that's where Fred got the bulk of this stuff from. And he was allowed to go in and he would either re-photograph it, print it out, do things like that. And it just, obviously it helped him in what he was trying to explore for. But when you look at a lot of those things, like going back to the Sutter Butte or the Live Oak site, I mean, in talking to these guys, that's where you gather, a lot of this. And then when I saw the carts that he was describing, right, the night before, sitting in a bar,
right.
I mean, here's the carts. And so I was laughing with my friend, my God, here's the, and he was right, here's the carts. And you're just like going, oh my, I mean, that's outstanding.
So you saw them in there post-salvage, they were still in there?
Sure, they were still in there.
Nice.
And the old man had told me, he says, this is how we got them back to where we could take them out of. And so, of course, and I would imagine how they did it then is that the access portal was operational. Because, see, if I can't remember on a Titan 1 if it was like an Atlas F, the personnel and freight elevator was good for 5,000 pounds. I'm not sure on a Titan 1. For some reason, I want to say it was like 10 or 20,000 pounds.
Damn.
Because, when those doors opened up for it on the surface, that elevator would come all the way up. So that was the way you would bring in your heavy equipment.
Right.
Okay. And in fact, other than the Batum site, let's face it, that's how they got the diesels and the generators out. They took them apart, they put them, they got them into the elevator, and then they lifted them up to the surface and got them out that way.
Well, what made them choose?
No indication. Go ahead.
What made them choose Batum to just tear the ceiling out?
That's a really good question. I can tell you, it's interesting. I told you early on when we started here tonight, the tie-in between like Atlas F and Titan 1. Here's a real interesting one for you. The first squadron commander for the 579th at Walker Air Force Base, Roswell, New Mexico, was Edward M. Jaquette. I hope I get the pronunciation correct.
Right.
Okay? When the first missile, when Site 1 blew up in June of 1963, okay, he was relieved, okay, because in those days, remember, SAC, had a very limited policy. There was, any screw up, your career's over.
You're done.
Yeah. And Jaquette was one of the commanders of the first Thor units in England.
Damn.
So he had a stellar career, right? It was just, and there was nothing he could have done. How could he have known that when the site was being put together, there was a hydrocarbon located in one of the valves? So when they were detanking the Atlas F, that LOX came in contact with that hydrocarbon, and, you get the picture of what occurs, right? Horrific explosion.
Yeah.
I mean, enough so it blew 150,000-pound doors 100 feet in each direction. And the launch crew lived.
Yeah.
So he obviously, he then became part of that side, and he wrote the article, which I think is on Siloworld. So when you read the article and see the pictures of them removing the diesels out of the Batum site, it was done by him, which I always thought was kind of neat. And then here's the other funny tie-in. Then at some point, one of the early commanders of the 568 at Larson for Titan 1, okay, Robert Milner, Colonel, he's transferred to Walker after the second squadron commander, Chalifo, is relieved.
Huh.
And then Milner becomes the new commanding officer for the 579th at Walker. So, I mean, it's just